When a black woman CEO got denied service at her own bank, she didn't yell. She stayed calm. 5 minutes later, the manager who judged her was fired on the spot. It was supposed to be a simple errand, 10, maybe 15 minutes at most. The kind of task you squeeze in between back-to-back meetings. That morning, Nadira Langston, 48 years old, head of a multi-million-dollar tech firm based out of Phoenix, Arizona, stepped out of her driver's black Lincoln and walked into Sycamore First Bank with her company's banking portfolio neatly tucked under her arm. She wasn't in a rush. She didn't need to be. Her entire calendar had been cleared so she could finalize the transfer of a large business account, one of several her company had been moving for months now. The account manager she usually worked with had retired, and today she was just meeting the new team in person to sign off on the final documents. Straightforward, routine. Her navy blue suit was tailored to perfection. Hair in a clean, low bun, diamond studs in her ears. Nothing flashy, just polished. Her heels didn't click across the floor. They whispered. She held herself like someone who had been in charge long enough to no longer need to prove it. She stepped up to the reception desk and gave her name. Nadira Langston. I'm here to meet with someone from the commercial accounts department. The young woman behind the counter looked up briefly and nodded, typing something into the system. Okay, give me a sec. That's when it started. From a nearby glass office, a woman, mid-50s, pale blonde hair, rigid posture, stepped out and walked over with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Can I help you with something? She asked, her voice clipped. Nadira turned and extended her hand. Yes, thank you. I'm Nadira Langston. I believe I'm supposed to meet with someone from the business team. I'm finalizing a transfer. But the woman didn't take her hand. She glanced at the folder Nadira was holding. And you are... With which company? I'm the CEO of Bluestone Dynamics. The account was handled by Peter Larson before he retired. The manager raised an eyebrow, barely hiding her skepticism. And you're here, alone? Yes, Nadira replied calmly. It's a private matter. There was a pause. One of those pauses that says more than a full sentence. The kind where judgment is dressed up as confusion. Right, the woman said, shifting her stance. Well, we typically don't allow walk-ins for high-tier accounts unless it's been cleared in advance. It was, Nadira said, still calm. She pulled out the confirmation email. Here's the appointment confirmation from your internal scheduler. Today, 9:30 a.m. The woman glanced at it, then back at Nadira. Are you sure this isn't meant for someone else in your company? Nadira blinked once, slowly. I run the company. Another pause. My name's Cheryl Bainbridge. I'm the branch manager. We've had a few incidents recently. People misrepresenting their credentials to access high-value accounts. You understand, I'm sure. Nadira understood plenty. Cheryl, is it? She said, her voice still cool, still even. Would it help if I showed you my license, my corporate ID, and the transaction documents I'm here to authorize? Cheryl's smile tightened. It's just protocol, Ms. Langston. Don't take it personally. That line always came when something was personal. Nadira had heard it too many times, from too many boardrooms, airport lounges, and hotel lobbies. But before she could say anything else, Cheryl gestured to the receptionist. Can you please call security? Just to be safe. We need to verify her claims. Nadira's jaw didn't move. Her voice stayed level. You're calling security? On the CEO of one of your largest incoming clients? Cheryl's posture stiffened further. I didn't say that. I just said we need to verify. And that's when something shifted in the room. A low murmur from a man sitting in the waiting area. A glance exchanged between two tellers behind the counter. The energy changed. Because it was clear Nadira had done everything right and was still being treated like she didn't belong. But Nadira wasn't about to let it go. Not this time. The bank lobby wasn't packed, but there were enough people to witness what was happening. An older man waiting in line shifted awkwardly. A woman sitting near the loan office pulled out her phone, pretending to check email, but her eyes stayed on Nadira and Cheryl. The security guard hadn't arrived yet, but Cheryl stood her ground like she expected backup any second. Nadira slowly opened her folder. Inside were all the documents needed to verify who she was: business cards, certified articles of incorporation, 2 forms of ID, and the bank's own documents detailing the account transfer. She laid them out on the reception desk one by one, like a dealer at a card table. Calm. Precise. "Here," she said. "That's my Arizona state ID. This is my company's EIN confirmation. This document shows the board resolution authorizing me as the account signer, and this," she tapped the final sheet, "is your bank's own welcome letter." Cheryl barely glanced at the papers. "Anyone can print documents," she said, crossing her arms. "I've worked in banking for 27 years. I've seen people pretend to be CFOs, consultants, even heirs to estates. We don't make exceptions just because someone claims they're important." Nadira's voice didn't rise, but her eyes did narrow. "So it's not about the paperwork. It's about how I look, isn't it?" Cheryl scoffed. "Excuse me. You heard me. If I were a 55-year-old man in a Brooks Brothers suit, you'd be shaking my hand and offering coffee." "Ma'am, please lower your voice. My voice is already lowered," Nadira said, her words slicing through the air like ice. "I'm the CEO. You've seen the documents. You've heard my name. But the only thing you actually noticed is that I'm not what you expected." There was a pause. A long, ugly pause, and then Cheryl said it. Not loud, but loud enough. "You just don't look like a CEO." The moment hung in the air like smoke after a match has been struck. Someone gasped. Another person mumbled, "Did she really just say that?" The receptionist froze behind the desk. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Nadira blinked slowly, but her voice didn't tremble. "I've raised over $80 million in venture capital. I've led 3 product launches. I've keynoted at CES and closed deals in 6 countries. I don't need to look like anything to be exactly who I am." Cheryl opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Nadira turned slightly and asked the receptionist, "Is there a regional director assigned to this branch?" The young woman nodded hesitantly. "He's here today, actually. Surprise audit. He's in the back conference room." Nadira's lips curved into a half smile. "Good. I'd like to speak to him." "Now." Cheryl stepped in again, clearly flustered now. "There's no need for that. I can handle this. Let's not escalate." Nadira turned to her fully. "You've already escalated this. You've called security. You've dismissed every form of ID I've given you. You've questioned my title, my company, and my legitimacy, all without making a single phone call to verify a single fact. So no, you can't handle this." The room had gone quiet. The receptionist picked up the phone and dialed the internal line. "Mr. Dorsey?" she said. "There's someone here asking to speak with you. Her name is Nadira Langston, from Bluestone Dynamics." A short pause. "Yes. Okay, I'll let her know." She hung up and looked at Nadira, eyes wide. "He's coming out right now." But Cheryl still hadn't realized how badly she'd misread the situation. The door at the back of the bank opened, and a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out. His pace was brisk, purposeful, not rushed, but definitely alert. He carried a slim leather tablet and wore the kind of expression that said he didn't like being pulled from meetings for no reason. But the second his eyes landed on Nadira, that expression changed. "Nadira Langston," he said, already extending his hand. She shook it firmly. "Yes, you must be Mr. Dorsey." "Matthew Dorsey, Regional Director. I've heard a lot about you. Peter spoke very highly before he retired. We're honored to be handling your accounts." Cheryl's mouth parted slightly, the color draining from her face. Matthew turned toward her, confused. "Was there an issue with the meeting?" Cheryl opened her mouth, fumbling for words. I was just making sure the credentials were legitimate before granting access to the commercial suite. Standard protocol." Nadira didn't speak yet. She didn't need to. The receptionist, still sitting behind the counter, added carefully, "She called security, sir. Said we couldn't verify the client's identity." Matthew blinked. "You called security? On Ms. Langston?" "I was trying to follow guidelines." Cheryl replied quickly. "We've had some people come in recently claiming false business credentials. I didn't want to take any risks. You know how sensitive our commercial accounts are." He gave her a flat stare. Yes, I do. Which is why you verify credentials, not profile clients based on how you feel about them. Cheryl's shoulders stiffened. Excuse me? I've seen the compliance logs. You didn't even open the file she brought in. You ignored the appointment on record. You dismissed the ID. I was protecting the bank, she insisted. You embarrassed the bank, Matthew shot back. You just publicly humiliated one of the most high-profile clients we've onboarded this year, in front of customers, in front of staff, with zero justification. A security guard finally appeared at the front, radio on his belt, scanning the room as if expecting a problem. Matthew waved him off immediately. We're good here, Eric. False call. Cheryl tried again, her voice trembling now. She came in alone. She wasn't on the regular calendar. She was on the updated internal calendar, the one your assistant manages. The same one you approved every Monday morning. You just didn't check. Nadira stepped forward slightly, voice low but clear. You didn't hesitate because something was missing. You hesitated because I didn't match your picture of who's allowed to carry this kind of power. Matthew didn't interrupt. He let the silence hang. There was nothing left to explain. Cheryl's lips parted again, but no words came. Miss Langston, Matthew said, turning back with professionalism restored. Would you mind coming with me? I'll personally handle your transaction from my office. Nadira nodded once. Gladly. They began walking away, past the rows of desks and glass-walled offices. Cheryl remained frozen near the front desk, eyes wide, expression unreadable. No one approached her. The receptionist stared at her keyboard. The security guard walked away slowly, as if unsure what to do next. Just as they were about to disappear down the hall, Matthew stopped and turned around. Cheryl. She looked up, visibly startled. My office. After this meeting. We'll be discussing your role here in detail. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. But by then, Cheryl could already feel the ground shifting under her feet. Matthew's office was sharp but not flashy. Clean lines, 2 chairs across from his desk, a tall window with morning light stretching across the carpet. Nadira didn't sit until he offered her the seat, and even then her posture stayed straight, her presence steady. He closed the door gently, then turned back toward her. Miss Langston, I want to apologize for what just happened. That shouldn't have occurred. Not here, not anywhere. You were treated unfairly. I appreciate that, Nadira said calmly, placing her folder on the desk. But this isn't the first time. Probably won't be the last. Still, Matthew replied, leaning against the edge of his desk. We have protocol for a reason. To prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening. Cheryl ignored every step. She didn't just ignore protocol, Nadira said. She made a decision about me the moment she saw my face. Matthew exhaled through his nose, folding his arms. I can't argue that. He picked up the documents she had laid out again, flipping through them silently. He wasn't rushing. He was absorbing. This is all in order, he said. Not that I ever doubted, but I want to ask, did she ever give you a chance to explain anything before calling security? Not really, Nadira replied. She saw my name, saw my face, heard my title, and still asked if the appointment was for someone else. Matthew ran a hand down the side of his jaw. That's going to be a problem for her. A big one. Nadira tilted her head. I didn't come here for someone to get fired. I know that, but sometimes consequences are earned. Just then, his office phone buzzed. He picked it up, listened briefly, then said, Send her in. A knock came seconds later, and Cheryl stepped in. Gone was the stiff confidence. Her face was pale, her shoulders drawn in slightly. She walked like someone who wasn't sure where to put her hands or her eyes. Miss Langston, she began, her voice thin. I owe you an apology. I misjudged. That wasn't my intention. You don't have to lie, Nadira said, cutting in. Her voice wasn't cruel, just firm. You intended exactly what you did. You didn't think I was who I said I was. And instead of checking, you made a decision to humiliate me. Cheryl glanced at Matthew, clearly hoping he would save her from the moment. But he stayed quiet. I have worked in this field for over 2 decades, she continued. I have seen fraud, identity theft, All kinds of deception. And none of that applied to me, Nadira said. You didn't make a mistake because you were cautious. You made a mistake because you were confident you could get away with it. Matthew finally spoke. Cheryl, after reviewing everything that happened this morning, including the internal audit records and client appointment logs, I've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. Cheryl blinked. Terminate? Are you serious? Yes, I am, Matthew replied. You violated client protocol, disrespected one of our most valuable account holders, and made a public scene that risked the bank's reputation. This wasn't an isolated slip-up. It was a pattern, and it stops here. She looked like she wanted to fight back, but there was no air left in the room for her to push against. She turned toward Nadira. I never meant to offend you personally. You didn't offend me, Nadira said quietly. You disrespected me. There's a difference. Cheryl looked down, then turned, walked out the door, and left it ajar behind her. Matthew didn't move for a few seconds. Then he sat behind his desk and looked up. I hope that brings at least some measure of accountability. It's a start, Nadira replied. But outside that office, the story was already leaving the bank behind. Word doesn't travel fast in a bank, unless something dramatic happens. And what happened that morning at Sycamore First wasn't just dramatic. It was undeniable. By the time Nadira and Matthew exited the office, the atmosphere in the lobby had shifted completely. Customers stood quiet. Tellers whispered behind their desks. Cheryl's absence was more noticeable than her presence had ever been. Her nameplate had already been removed from the front glass office, as if she'd never belonged there to begin with. Matthew walked Nadira out personally. I'll make sure the remainder of the paperwork is handled by someone competent, he said. You shouldn't have to deal with this level of nonsense. Ever. Nadira nodded, accepting the folder he returned to her. The paperwork is the easy part. He gave a small laugh. Tight. Respectful. I suppose it is. They reached the front doors, where two customers held them open without being asked. One of the tellers stood up behind the counter and gave a slight wave, uncertain but sincere. Outside, the sun was rising higher above Phoenix. The air was dry, the pavement warm. Nadira paused near the curb, her driver stepping forward, door already open. She turned back to Matthew. You said something in your office that stuck with me, that sometimes consequences are earned. He nodded. Yes, I agree, she said. But consequences without understanding don't change much. Matthew raised his eyebrows, curious. I don't need Cheryl to suffer, Nadira continued. I need people to realize this wasn't about me. This happens to black professionals, especially women, every single day. It happens at airports, restaurants, stores, meetings, and most of the time, nobody gets fired. They just get dismissed. Again and again. He didn't interrupt. He let her speak. Maybe for the first time, someone like him truly listened. If the bank wants to take this seriously, she said, don't just post some statement online. Don't send out a generic apology. Hold a conversation. Teach your managers what they missed. Make it harder for this to happen to the next woman who walks through that door. Matthew took a breath, his shoulders a little heavier now. You're right. I can't undo what happened. But I can make sure it leads to something better. Then that's the real test, isn't it? Nadira replied. Not what you do when people are watching, but what you change when they're not. She got into the car, and the door shut behind her. Inside, the silence wasn't heavy. It was clear. Her driver looked back in the mirror. Everything all right, Miss Langston? She looked down at her hands, then out the window at the glass front of the bank. Cheryl had made a decision to disregard her, but the decision that mattered, the one that would carry weight, had already been made by someone else. Yeah, she said softly. Now it is. But Nadira had no idea that within 24 hours the whole country would be talking about what happened inside that branch. It started with a tweet. Just a few lines from someone who'd been sitting near the loan officer's desk that morning. Just watched a black woman CEO get denied service at her own bank. She kept her cool, called out the bias, and the manager got fired on the spot. I don't even know her name, but I'll never forget how she carried herself. By lunchtime, the tweet had over 40,000 likes. By evening, it was on Instagram, then Facebook, then local news. A local blogger tracked down Nadira's name by cross-referencing a press release Bluestone Dynamics had issued earlier that month. A Phoenix reporter confirmed it with the bank. By nightfall, Nadira Langston was trending nationwide. She didn't post anything herself. She didn't need to. Everyone else did. LinkedIn lit up with praise. Corporate professionals, many of them black women, shared similar stories. Being questioned at the valet of their own office buildings, asked to show ID 3 times before boarding first-class flights, being called sweetie while leading negotiations worth millions. People called Nadira graceful, resilient, composed. But those who knew better said it wasn't just grace. It was survival. Meanwhile, Sycamore First's corporate office went into overdrive. They released a carefully worded statement within 24 hours, acknowledging the incident, confirming Cheryl Bainbridge was no longer employed, and stating that the company was committed to equity and ongoing training. But that wasn't enough for the public. Comments flooded in. How many other Cheryls are still working in your branches? Do your execs understand that implicit bias training can't fix what hiring practices allow? The burden shouldn't fall on black women to be calm while being disrespected. Nadira didn't respond to any of it publicly. Not until 3 days later, when she agreed to speak on a podcast hosted by a longtime friend and business strategist, Leona Bates. They sat across from each other in a quiet studio in Tempe, microphones on, no notes in front of them. Leona started gently. You've stayed quiet while the internet's exploded. Why now? Because the moment isn't about me anymore, Nadira replied. It's about what this whole thing revealed, Leona leaned in. Which is that even with all the right titles, the right documents, the right credentials, people still treat you like you don't belong. And when you speak up, it's called making a scene. When you stay silent, it's taken as approval. Either way, it's exhausting. They talked for nearly an hour. Not just about the bank, but about the deeper toll of navigating power structures while carrying centuries of assumptions on your shoulders. Nadira didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just told the truth. Clear, steady, undeniable. After the episode aired, a new wave of attention followed. Not performative, not shallow. Genuine reflection. Other CEOs reached out. Business journals covered the story. One headline read, "She didn't raise her voice, she raised the bar." Still, Nadira kept it all in perspective. She didn't want fame. She wanted change. And she knew real change doesn't show up in headlines. It shows up in hiring, in policy, in who gets believed the first time. But even as the story moved from news feeds to memory, the people who watched her that morning at the bank hadn't forgotten what they saw. A few weeks later, Nadira stood in front of a room full of college students at Arizona State University. She hadn't planned on doing any public speaking that season. Her calendar was already overflowing. But when a business ethics professor reached out and asked if she'd talk to her class, she said yes without hesitation. It wasn't a flashy event. No stage lights, no press. Just 40 students, some scribbling in notebooks, others hunched over laptops, waiting to hear from the woman whose story had turned a routine bank visit into a national discussion. She didn't bring slides, no podium. She just walked to the front of the room, took a breath, and started speaking. "I'm not going to tell you a fairy tale," she said. "I'm not going to tell you that if you work hard enough, no one will question you, because that's not always true." The room was quiet. Everyone listening. You can have the title, the suit, the contracts, the track record, and still be told you don't belong. Not because of anything you've done wrong, but because someone else can't imagine your success without a face that looks like theirs. She looked around. Her voice stayed soft, but every word landed. And when that happens, you have to decide, will you shrink to make them comfortable, or will you stay exactly as big as you are, even if it makes the room tense? A young man in the front row raised his hand. "How did you stay calm when it happened? Weren't you angry?" Nadira nodded slowly. "Of course I was. But anger's only useful if you know what to do with it. That day, I used it to stay present. I used it to make sure she couldn't dismiss me without looking me in the eye while doing it. Another hand went up, this time from a young woman. What would you say to someone just starting out, who hasn't built a resume like yours yet? Nadira paused. Know your worth before anyone else has the chance to define it for you. And if they try to shrink you, speak anyway, even if your voice shakes. There was something about the way she said it, like she was speaking to herself as much as to them. After the talk, students lined up to thank her. Some just wanted to shake her hand. Others wanted advice. One young woman quietly said, "I'm in engineering. I've been thinking about quitting. I didn't think there was room for someone like me." "There is," Nadira said, looking her in the eyes. "And if there isn't, make it." That night, back at her office, Nadira sat alone at her desk, sipping a cup of tea. Her inbox was still full. Her phone kept buzzing. The attention hadn't died down completely, but she knew it would eventually. Public memory was short, but some people would remember. The students, the customers in that bank lobby, the employees who saw a manager lose her job because someone refused to back down. And maybe, just maybe, the next time a woman like her walked into a place she wasn't expected, she wouldn't be questioned first. She'd be greeted, respected, because of one moment, one voice, one refusal to stay quiet. If this story moved you, even a little, share it. And remember, change doesn't always start with loud protests or viral headlines. Sometimes it starts with a calm, unwavering voice that says, "This isn't right."